Harsh reality hits you when you wake up exhausted after 4 hours of sleep, drag yourself through another grueling day, check your bank account to see numbers that barely move, sit alone in your apartment, somehow convince yourself that tomorrow will be different. You tell yourself that if you just push a little harder, sacrifice a little more, endure a little longer, everything will eventually fall into place. But here's what nobody wants to hear. That relentless perseverance you're so proud of might actually be the root of your suffering. The very trait you've been taught to worship as the ultimate masculine virtue could be slowly destroying you from the inside out. Think about it. Every single day, you wake up feeling like garbage. Nothing seems to be working out the way you planned. Your relationships are strained or non-existent. Your career feels like an endless uphill battle. Your body aches in ways it shouldn't at your age. Your mind feels foggy and disconnected. And yet, what do? You clench your jaw, take a deep breath, and tell yourself to keep pushing forward. Keep grinding. Keep persevering. Because that's what you're supposed to do, right? That's what separates the winners from the losers, the strong from the weak, the successful from the failures. But let me ask you something. If every step you take down this path makes you more miserable than the last, what point do you stop and wonder if maybe you're walking in the wrong direction? If each promotion brings more stress than satisfaction, if each achievement feels emptier than the one before, if each sacrifice leaves you feeling more depleted than fulfilled, when do you consider that perhaps the strategy itself is flawed? Uncomfortable truth is that you might not be depressed because something is wrong with your brain chemistry. You might be depressed because your brain is correctly evaluating the life you've constructed around yourself. Men have this incredible ability to endure almost anything. They can function on minimal sleep for years. They can work jobs they hate for decades. They can ignore their own needs indefinitely. They can suppress their emotions so completely that they forget what genuine feeling even is. They can accumulate debt, live in isolation, sacrifice their health, abandon their hobbies, and still maintain this unwavering faith that someday, somehow, it will all be worth it. This capacity for endurance is often celebrated as strength, as resilience, as the defining characteristic of manhood itself. Nobody talks about what this endurance actually costs. There's a particular pattern that emerges in people who appear to have everything together on the surface. These are individuals who wake up every morning, complete their obligations, meet their responsibilities, and maintain their routines. From the outside, they look functional, productive, even successful. They haven't collapsed. They haven't given up. They're still showing up to work, paying their bills, fulfilling their duties. But internally, they're absolutely falling apart. This is what some researchers call high-functioning depression. The label itself almost feels inadequate to capture the full scope of what's happening. When most people think about depression, they imagine someone who can't get out of bed, someone whose entire life has visibly fallen apart, someone who's obviously struggling. That's not always how it manifests. Sometimes depression looks like a person who's excelling at work while dying inside. Sometimes it looks like someone who's meeting every external expectation while feeling completely hollow. It looks like achievement and accomplishment built on a foundation of profound internal suffering. The person maintains their facade so effectively that even they start to believe it's real. The mechanism behind this is actually quite fascinating from a psychological perspective. You find yourself in a situation that makes you unhappy. The natural response would be to change that situation. If your job makes you miserable, you'd typically look for a different job. If your relationships are toxic, you'd set boundaries or walk away. If your lifestyle is unsustainable, you'd adjust it. That's how adaptive coping works. You feel discomfort, you identify the source, and you make changes to reduce that discomfort. It's straightforward, logical, and healthy. But something else can happen instead. Instead of changing the situation, you can change your response to the situation. You can take that feeling of wanting to quit, urge to escape, that desire for something different, and you can transform it into fuel. You can tell yourself that the discomfort is weakness leaving your body. You can convince yourself that suffering is necessary for success. You can interpret your unhappiness as a challenge to overcome rather than a signal to heed. This psychological process is called sublimation, and it can be incredibly powerful in the short term. Sublimation allows you to take negative emotions and channel them into productive outcomes. You hate your entry-level position. Perfect. Use that hatred to drive yourself to get promoted. You feel inadequate. Excellent. Use that inadequacy to push yourself to achieve more. You want to quit? Great. Prove to yourself that you're not a quitter by going even harder. Emotional alchemy, transforming the base metal of suffering into the gold of achievement. And initially, it works. You do get promoted. You do achieve more. You do prove your strength. The external markers of success start accumulating. But here's where the trap closes. Because you haven't actually addressed the underlying issue. You've just gotten better at ignoring it. The job that made you unhappy didn't become fulfilling. You just became more skilled at suppressing your unhappiness. That felt wrong, didn't start feeling right. You just numbed yourself to the feeling of wrongness. And now you're in a new position with new responsibilities and new pressures, and you're even more unhappy than before. So what do? The same thing that worked last time. You sublimate again, you push harder. You go for the next promotion, the next achievement, the next milestone. This creates a vicious cycle where each success makes you more miserable. Each increase in misery drives you to pursue more success. You're climbing a ladder that's leaning against the wrong building. You've convinced yourself that if you just climb high enough, the building will somehow become the right one. You're running on a treadmill set to an ever-increasing speed, believing that if you just run fast enough, you'll eventually arrive somewhere better. But you're not going anywhere. You're just getting more exhausted. The most insidious part of this pattern is how it's reinforced by the culture around you. Society sees your ability to endure suffering and calls it strength. Your family sees your willingness to sacrifice and calls it responsibility. Your peers see your relentless drive and call it ambition. You look in the mirror and see someone who hasn't quit, hasn't failed, hasn't broken down, and you call it success. Everyone is celebrating the very behavior that's destroying you. Everyone is encouraging you to keep doing the thing that's making you miserable. And if you're a man, this dynamic is amplified tenfold, because being a man in contemporary society often means being the person who endures without complaining. It means being the person who carries burdens without asking for help. It means being the person who suppresses their needs and feelings in service of others. It means never being the person who quits, never being the person who admits defeat, never being the person who says they can't handle it anymore. These expectations aren't explicitly stated as rules, but they're communicated through countless subtle messages from childhood onward. Real men don't cry. Real men don't quit. Real men don't complain. Real men just handle it. So when you feel overwhelmed, when you feel exhausted, when you feel like you can't continue, you don't interpret those feelings as valid signals from your nervous system. Instead, you interpret them as character flaws that need to be overcome. You feel sad. That's weakness. You feel anxious. That's cowardice. Quitting. That's failure. And what do you do with weakness, cowardice, and failure? You eliminate them. You suppress them. You deny their existence. You refuse to let them define you. You become someone who doesn't feel those things, or at least someone who doesn't acknowledge feeling those things. This is where something truly dangerous begins to happen, because the human brain isn't designed to selectively suppress specific emotions. When you shut down your capacity to feel sadness, you're also diminishing your capacity to feel joy. When you numb yourself to anxiety, you're also numbing yourself to excitement. When you suppress your desire to quit things that harm you, you're also suppressing your desire to pursue things that fulfill you. Emotions aren't separate channels that can be individually controlled. They're all connected, all part of the same system. When you turn down the volume on the negative, you inevitably turn down the volume on the positive as well. This leads to a state that researchers call anhedonia, which literally means the inability to experience pleasure. It's not that pleasurable things become less pleasurable, it's that you become unable to register pleasure at all. Food doesn't taste as good. Music doesn't move you. Accomplishments feel empty. Relationships feel flat. Activities that used to bring joy now feel like obligations. Everything becomes gray and muted and dull. You're going through the motions of living, but you're not actually experiencing life. Ghost piloting a body through a series of predetermined routines. And the truly terrifying part is that this doesn't feel like a problem at first, because you've been taught that pleasure is for the weak. You've been taught that enjoyment is a distraction from the grind. You've been taught that if you're having fun, you're not working hard enough. Pleasure starts to fade from your life. You don't see it as a loss. You see it as evidence of your dedication. You're so focused, driven, so committed that you don't have time for frivolous pleasures. You're beyond such petty concerns. You're on a mission. You're building something. You're becoming someone. But who are you becoming? That's the question that eventually catches up with everyone on this path. You're becoming the person who wakes up at 5 a.m, even though they're exhausted. You're becoming the person who works 70 hours a week, even though they hate their job. You're becoming the person who has no friends because they have no time for relationships. You're becoming the person who hasn't pursued a hobby in years because hobbies don't generate income. You're becoming the person who looks successful from the outside while feeling completely dead inside. You're becoming a person built around an identity rather than around your actual self. And this distinction is crucial. Your identity is who you think you should be. Your self is who you actually are. Your identity is the image you're trying to project. Your self is the reality you're trying to escape. Your identity is the person you're working toward becoming. Yourself is the person you're running away from being. And the tragedy is that the harder you work to become your identity, the further you drift from yourself. Think about what this means in practical terms. You have feelings, needs, desires, preferences, values, and boundaries. These are fundamental aspects of who you are as a human being. But many of these feelings, needs, desires, preferences, values, boundaries don't align with the identity you're trying to embody. So what do? You ignore them. You suppress them. You tell yourself they don't matter. You convince yourself they're obstacles to overcome rather than information to integrate. You perform what's essentially a psychic amputation, cutting away parts of yourself that don't fit the image you're pursuing. Maybe you're exhausted and your body is screaming at you to rest, but the identity you're pursuing doesn't rest. You take another caffeine pill and keep going. Maybe you're lonely and your heart is aching. For connection, the identity you're pursuing doesn't need other people. You convince yourself that relationships are distractions and keep grinding in isolation. Maybe you're bored with your work and your mind is desperate for stimulation, but the identity you're pursuing doesn't quit when things get hard. You double down on the job you hate and suppress the desire for something more fulfilling. Each of these suppressions requires energy. Each of these denials creates internal tension. Each of these amputations leaves a wound. And over time, the accumulated weight of all this suppression, all this tension, all these wounds becomes unbearable. But by this point, you've built your entire life around this identity, your job, your relationships, your routines, your self-image. Everything is structured around being this person you've decided you should be. So you can't stop. You can't change course. You can't admit that maybe you've been wrong about what would make you happy, because doing so would mean dismantling everything you've built. It would mean admitting that all those sacrifices were for nothing. It would mean acknowledging that you've been running in the wrong direction all along. So instead, you keep going. You keep pushing. You keep persevering. And the pressure builds. The suppressed emotions accumulate like water behind a dam. Unaddressed needs compound like interest on a debt. The ignored signals from your body and mind become louder and more desperate. You've gotten so good at not listening that you barely notice anymore. You've become so disconnected from yourself that you don't even recognize how much pain you're in. You just know that something feels wrong. You can't quite put your finger on what. This is where the physical symptoms often begin to manifest, because the body keeps score even when the mind refuses to pay attention. All that suppressed stress has to go somewhere. All those unprocessed emotions have to express themselves somehow. If you won't listen to the psychological signals, your body will start sending physiological ones. Headaches, digestive issues, muscle tension, sleep disturbances, chronic pain, blood pressure, heart palpitations, weakened immune function. The list goes on and on. And here's what's particularly cruel about this. These physical symptoms appear, they often drive people to seek external solutions. They start listening to health podcasts, trying different supplements, experimenting with specialized diets, pursuing biohacking strategies, all in an attempt to fix what's wrong with their body. And there's nothing inherently wrong with taking care of your physical health. If the root cause of your physical symptoms is psychological stress that you're refusing to address, no amount of supplements or diet changes or sleep optimization will actually solve the problem. You're treating the symptoms while ignoring the disease. It's like you're underwater, swimming deeper and deeper while holding your breath. Your body is sending you increasingly urgent signals that you need oxygen. Your lungs are burning. Your chest is tight. Your head is pounding. These signals are telling you to surface. They're telling you to breathe. But instead of listening to these signals, instead of swimming upward toward the air, you interpret them as challenges to overcome. You take pride in your ability to ignore the burning in your lungs. You push yourself to swim even deeper. You convince yourself that only weak people need to breathe as frequently as the signals suggest. And eventually, inevitably, your body gives out. This is how you end up with successful people having heart attacks in their 40s. This is how you end up with high achievers developing autoimmune disorders. This is how you end up with driven individuals experiencing complete physical breakdowns. They spent so long ignoring their body's signals, long powering through the warning signs, long treating their physical limitations as obstacles to overcome rather than information to respect. Their body eventually forced the issue in a way that couldn't be ignored. And the most tragic part is that this capacity to ignore your body's signals is often celebrated. People brag about how little sleep they need. They take pride in their ability to work through pain. They compete over who can push themselves the hardest, frame self-destruction as self-discipline. They mistake the ability to endure suffering for the wisdom to avoid it. They confuse strength with stubbornness, and society reinforces this confusion at every turn. Think about the language we use. We talk about grinding, crushing it, hustling, going hard, pushing limits, maximizing potential. All of this language frames life as a competition, as a battle, as something to be conquered. And when you're in battle mode, when you're trying to conquer something, you don't listen to signals of discomfort. You push through them. You ignore them. You treat them as enemy propaganda designed to make you quit. But what if those signals aren't the enemy? What if they're actually trying to help you? What if pain is information rather than weakness? What if exhaustion is a message rather than a character flaw? Let's dig deeper into why this pattern is so addictive, why it's so hard to break free from once you're caught in it. The answer lies in how sublimation actually works at a neurological level. When you take a negative emotion like frustration or inadequacy or fear and channel it into productive action, you get a real reward. You accomplish something. You achieve something. You prove something. And your brain releases dopamine in response to this achievement. You feel good, or at least you feel less bad. The negative emotion is temporarily resolved. This creates a powerful reinforcement loop. Negative emotion leads to driven action leads to achievement leads to dopamine release. Dopamine release reduces the negative emotion. Your brain learns that when you feel bad, the solution is to work harder, achieve more, push further. And for a while, this works beautifully. You feel inadequate, so you study harder and get better grades. You feel weak, you train harder and get stronger. You feel unsuccessful, so you work harder and get promoted. Each time, the formula delivers results. Each time, The negative feeling is temporarily alleviated. Each time, your brain gets a hit of neurochemical reward. But here's the problem. The underlying source of the negative emotions hasn't been addressed. You still fundamentally feel inadequate. Just now you have achievements to point to as evidence that you shouldn't feel that way. You still fundamentally feel weak. Now you have muscles to flex to prove otherwise. You still fundamentally feel unsuccessful. Now you have a job title to display to counter that feeling. The achievements are like makeup covering a wound. They make the wound less visible, but they don't help it heal. In fact, they might make it worse by preventing you from addressing it properly. What happens next? The negative feeling returns. Because it was never actually resolved, just temporarily suppressed. And when it returns, what do? The same thing that worked before. You push harder. You achieve more. You go for the next level. But this time, you need a bigger achievement to get the same dopamine hit. The promotion to manager felt good, but now you need to become a director. The marathon felt good, but now you need to qualify for an ultra marathon. The 6-figure income felt good, but now you need 7 figures. You're chasing bigger and bigger external achievements to fill a void that external achievements can actually fill. This is fundamentally the same mechanism that drives addiction. An addict uses a substance to feel better temporarily, but the substance doesn't solve the underlying problem, so they need to use again, and over time they need more of the substance to get the same effect. You're doing the exact same thing, except instead of a substance, you're using achievement, and instead of being stigmatized for it, you're being celebrated. Society looks at someone addicted to heroin and sees a problem. Society looks at someone addicted to achievement and sees a role model. The internal experience is remarkably similar. The heroin addict and the achievement addict are using an external solution to manage internal distress. Both develop tolerance, needing increasingly more to get the same effect. Both experience withdrawal when they can't get their fix. Both organize their entire life around obtaining the next hit. Both damage their health in pursuit of their addiction. Both know on some level that what they're doing isn't working, but feel unable to stop. The main difference is that one is illegal and the other gets you promoted. And here's where it gets even darker. Because at least the heroin addict, once they hit rock bottom, is typically forced to confront the fact that their strategy isn't working. They lose their job, their relationships, their health, their stability. The consequences become undeniable. But the achievement addict, they might never hit that rock bottom. They might maintain the facade indefinitely. They might keep getting promoted, keep earning more money, keep achieving bigger goals, all while dying inside. The external rewards keep coming, which makes it almost impossible to acknowledge that something is fundamentally wrong. This is the particular hell of high-functioning depression. You look successful. You are successful by conventional measures. You're profoundly unhappy. And when you try to express this unhappiness, people don't understand. They look at your life and see everything they wish they had. They can't comprehend why someone with your job, your income, your achievements, your accomplishments would be depressed. So you learn not to talk about it. You learn to keep up the facade. You learn to pretend that everything is fine. And the loneliness of this pretense becomes another weight you're carrying. Men in particular struggle with this because expressing emotional distress is so deeply stigmatized for them. A man who says he's struggling is seen as weak. A man who admits he's unhappy is seen as ungrateful. A man who acknowledges he needs help is seen as inadequate. So men learn to package their distress in more acceptable forms. They talk about physical symptoms instead of emotional ones. They frame their problems as strategic challenges to optimize rather than feelings to process. They approach their depression like a software bug to debug rather than an experience to understand. This avoidance of emotional acknowledgement leads to some characteristic patterns. Emotional suppression, obviously, feelings are actively pushed down and denied. Drug and alcohol use to numb the feelings that break through the suppression. Anger and aggression as the only acceptable masculine emotion, so all other feelings get channeled into rage. Symptoms as the body expresses what the mind refuses to acknowledge. Risk-taking behavior as a way to feel something, anything you've become so numb that normal life can't penetrate the barrier anymore. These aren't random behaviors. They're all strategies for managing emotional distress while maintaining the facade of being fine. They're all ways of not addressing the core issue. They're all substitutes for actually feeling your feelings and responding to what those feelings are telling you. All make the problem worse in the long run while providing temporary relief in the short run, which means they're incredibly difficult to give up, because giving them up means facing all the accumulated pain you've been avoiding. Let's talk about that accumulated pain for a moment. Imagine every time you had a feeling you didn't want to feel, instead of feeling it and letting it pass, you suppressed it and pushed it down. That feeling doesn't disappear. It goes into a kind of emotional storage, and every subsequent feeling you suppress gets added to the pile. Over months and years and decades, you accumulate this massive backlog of unprocessed emotions. They're all still there, all still active, all still demanding your energy to keep them suppressed. This is exhausting at a fundamental level. A significant portion of your mental and physical energy is being consumed just keeping this emotional backlog contained. You wonder why you always feel tired even when you get enough sleep. You wonder why simple tasks feel overwhelming even when they're objectively not that difficult. You wonder why you can't seem to find motivation even for things you used to enjoy. It's because you're using so much energy just maintaining the dam that there's barely any left over for actually living your life. And the dam is always threatening to break. Any additional stress, any unexpected challenge, any moment where your defenses are down, suddenly you're at risk of feeling everything all at once. This is terrifying. This is why you can't let your guard down. This is why you can't take a break. This is why you can't stop grinding. Because if you stop, if you pause, if you allow yourself a moment of stillness, you might have to feel something. And given how much you've accumulated, you'd feel would be overwhelming. So you stay busy, you stay distracted, you stay in motion. You fill every moment with activity, with noise, with stimulation. You check your phone constantly. You watch videos endlessly. You play games compulsively. You work obsessively. Anything to avoid being alone with your thoughts. Anything to avoid the risk of feeling. Because feeling, at this point, seems like it would destroy you. And you're not entirely wrong about that. If you suddenly felt everything you've been suppressing all at once, It would be overwhelming. It would be destabilizing. It would potentially be dangerous. This is why people often can't just suddenly stop these patterns. This is why you can't just decide one day to start feeling your feelings after years or decades of suppression. The backlog is too large. The pressure is too intense. You need support, you need structure, you need a gradual process of release. Or yes, it could be destructive. But here's what's also true. Maintaining the suppression is also destroying you just more slowly. Choosing between two forms of destruction, the quick, violent destruction of the dam breaking all at once, or the slow, grinding destruction of using all your energy to maintain the dam forever. Neither option seems good, and this is why people get stuck. They can see that their current path is unsustainable, but they can't see a safe alternative path. Just keep doing what they're doing, hoping somehow it will get better, knowing deep down that it won't. This is the moment where many people start looking for external solutions. They start researching mental health issues. They start learning about depression and anxiety and trauma. They find diagnoses that seem to fit. They discover that other people experience similar things. And there's tremendous relief in this discovery, in realizing you're not alone, in having language to describe what you're experiencing. But there's also a trap here, because if you conclude that your problem is a brain chemistry issue, a neurochemical imbalance, a genetic predisposition, then the solution becomes medication. And medication absolutely has its place. For some people, medication is life-changing and necessary. But here's the question you need to ask. If your depression is a reasonable response to a life you hate, will medication make you happy with that life? Or will it just make you more capable of tolerating a life that's making you miserable? This is the distinction between what some people call pathological depression and congruent depression. Pathological depression is when your brain is malfunctioning, when you're sad despite having every reason to be happy, when your neurochemistry is creating suffering that isn't warranted by your circumstances. In these cases, medication can help correct the malfunction, can help restore normal functioning, can help you accurately perceive a life that's actually good. Congruent depression is different. Congruent depression is when you're sad because your life is actually sad. You're anxious because your situation is actually precarious. You're exhausted because you're actually being overworked. You're lonely because you actually don't have meaningful connections. You're unfulfilled because you're actually not doing anything fulfilling. In these cases, your brain isn't malfunctioning. It's functioning exactly as it should, accurately assessing your circumstances and generating appropriate emotional responses to those circumstances. And if your depression is congruent, if it's an accurate response to your life, then the solution isn't to change your brain chemistry. The solution is to change your life. Medication might make you better able to endure an intolerable situation, but that's not the same as making the situation tolerable. In fact, medication that makes you better able to endure an intolerable situation might actually be harmful in the long run, because it removes the signal that's telling you something needs to change. Think about pain for a moment. Physical pain is a signal that something is wrong with your body. If you break your arm, you feel pain. That pain is information. It's telling you to stop using the arm to protect it, to seek medical attention. Now imagine you have a medication that completely eliminates pain. You break your arm, but you don't feel it, so you keep using the arm. You keep putting weight on it, you keep moving it around. What happens? The break gets worse. It doesn't heal properly. You cause additional damage. The pain was trying to protect you, and by eliminating the signal, you prevented that protection. Emotional pain works the same way. It's information. It's your psyche's way of telling you that something is wrong with your life. If you're in a situation that's harmful to you, you feel bad. That feeling is meant to motivate you to change the situation. If you medicate away the feeling without changing the situation, you're like someone taking painkillers for a broken arm while continuing to use the arm. You're eliminating the signal without addressing the problem. Now, this doesn't mean medication is never appropriate. Sometimes you need the painkiller for the broken arm. The pain is so intense that you can't function well enough to seek proper treatment without temporary relief. This medication buys you the space you need to do the harder work of actually changing your life. The problem is when medication becomes a substitute for change rather than a support during change. And men in particular often resist medication anyway, because taking medication for depression feels like admitting weakness. Acknowledging that your brain is broken, like failing at being strong enough to handle things on your own. Often don't even go down that path. Instead, they just keep grinding, keep pushing, keep persevering until something catastrophic happens, until their body completely breaks down, until they have a breakdown or a collapse that can't be ignored, until they do something irreversible in a moment of desperation. This is why male suicide rates are so disproportionately high. Men build these lives where they're successful on paper, but dying inside. They suppress all their emotional distress in service of maintaining the facade. They avoid seeking help because seeking help feels like admitting defeat. They use avoidant coping strategies that provide temporary relief, but make the underlying problem worse. And they do this for years or decades until the pressure becomes unbearable. And then, rather than dismantling the life they've built, rather than admitting that maybe they've been wrong about what they need, rather than reaching out for help, they conclude that the only way out is a permanent one. This isn't weakness. This isn't a character flaw. This isn't a failure of willpower. This is the logical endpoint of a system that teaches men to ignore their internal experience, to suppress their emotional needs, measure their worth by external achievements, to view asking for help as shameful, and to see endurance of suffering as virtuous. If you set up that system and run it long enough, this is where it leads. And we act surprised when men die by suicide at 3 or 4 times the rate of women, but we shouldn't be surprised. We've created the conditions that make this outcome likely. So what's the alternative? How do you break free from this pattern? The simple answer is that you have to start listening to yourself again. You have to start paying attention to what you actually feel rather than what you think you should feel. You have to start respecting the signals your body and mind are sending you rather than treating them as obstacles to overcome. You have to start changing the things that make you unhappy rather than just getting better at tolerating unhappiness. But the simple answer is also the hardest thing in the world to actually do. Because by this point, you've likely spent years or decades building your entire identity around not listening to yourself, your job, your relationships, your routines, your self-image. Everything is structured around being the person who pushes through, who doesn't quit, who endures whatever comes. If you start listening to yourself, if you start honoring what you actually feel, you'll have to confront the fact that large portions of your life might need to change. And that's terrifying. Maybe you'll realize you need to leave your job. Maybe you'll realize you need to leave your relationship. Maybe you'll realize you need to drastically reduce your responsibilities. Maybe you'll realize you need to disappoint people who are counting on you. Maybe you'll realize you need to give up achievements you worked years to obtain. Maybe you'll realize you need to become a fundamentally different person than who you've been trying to be. And all of that feels impossible. It feels like too much. It feels like starting over from zero, admitting that everything you've done up to this point was a mistake. This is where people get stuck in analysis paralysis. They can see that their current path is destroying them. They can imagine what a better path might look like. The gap between where they are and where they need to be feels insurmountable. So they don't take any action at all. They just stay stuck, knowing they need to change, but unable to actually do anything about it. And this awareness without action might be worse than unconscious suffering, because now you're suffering while knowing you're choosing to suffer, while knowing there's a better way, but feeling unable to access it. Let's talk about how you actually start moving in a different direction. And the key word there is start, because this isn't about transforming your entire life overnight. That's the same all or nothing thinking that got you into this mess in the first place. The same mentality that says if you're going to do something, you need to do it perfectly is the mentality that's been driving you into the ground. The first thing you need to do is let go of that mentality. Instead, you need to start small, ridiculously small, embarrassingly small, small that the size itself feels like admitting defeat. And that feeling, that resistance, that voice that says it's not enough, that's the voice of the identity you've been trying to embody. That's the voice of the person who thinks you need to achieve, to be perfect, to do everything right. That voice is not your friend. That voice has been lying to you. That voice has been the problem all along. Let me give you a concrete example. Let's say you look at yourself in the mirror and you don't like what you see. You feel overweight, shape unhealthy. The voice of your identity immediately starts generating a comprehensive improvement plan. Join a gym, hire a personal trainer, completely overhaul your diet, start waking up at 5 a.m. to work out, meal prep every Sunday, track every calorie, a strict program, go from 0 to 100 immediately. And this plan sounds great in theory. It sounds like what a successful person would do. It sounds like the kind of radical change that would transform you into someone worthy of respect. What actually happens when you try to implement a plan like this? You do great for a few days, maybe even a couple weeks. You're running on motivation and willpower. But motivation fades, willpower depletes. Life throws unexpected challenges at you. You miss a workout. You eat something that wasn't in your plan. You sleep in one morning, and suddenly the whole perfect plan has a crack in it. And because your identity requires perfection, because you've defined success as following the plan completely Single crack feels like total failure. You've proven you're not strong enough. You've confirmed you're a quitter. So why bother continuing? The plan is ruined. You've already failed. Might as well give up entirely and go back to your old patterns. This is the all or nothing thinking playing out in real time. Either you're perfect or you're a failure. Either you follow the plan completely or there's no point. Either you transform yourself dramatically or you don't change at all. This mentality guarantees failure because nobody can be perfect all the time. Nobody can maintain radical changes indefinitely. Nobody can live up to an impossible standard consistently. So you set yourself up to fail, then use that failure as evidence that you're fundamentally inadequate, which drives you deeper into the pattern of trying to prove yourself, which leads to another impossible standard, another inevitable failure, another confirmation of inadequacy. Out of this cycle is to do the opposite of what your identity tells you to do. Instead of a comprehensive, perfect plan, you pick one small thing. You don't join a gym. You don't hire a trainer. You don't overhaul anything. You just pick one tiny action that moves slightly in the direction of how you want to feel. Maybe you do 10 push-ups tomorrow morning. That's it. Full workout, not a transformation, just 10 push-ups. And your identity is going to scream at you that this isn't enough. 10 push-ups won't make you fit. 10 push-ups won't transform your body. 10 push-ups won't make you worthy of respect. 10 push-ups is pathetic. It's embarrassing. It's a joke. Any serious person would do more, do continue. Any strong person would commit to more. Any successful person would have a real plan, and you need to recognize that voice for what it is. That voice is the problem. Voice is what's been destroying you. That voice is the identity that's been crushing your actual self. So you do the 10 push-ups anyway, and they feel good or they don't feel good. Maybe they feel hard. Maybe they feel pointless. Maybe you can barely do them. Doesn't matter. You did them. And tomorrow you do them again. And the day after that, and at some point, your identity is going to say that this isn't enough, that you need to do more, that you need to escalate to a real plan. And you need to resist that voice. You need to keep doing just the 10 push-ups, because what you're building isn't a perfect body. What you're building is a new relationship with yourself. You're learning to take action based on what actually makes you feel better rather than what you think will make you into someone worthy. You're learning to sustain small, consistent behaviors rather than starting and failing at dramatic ones. You're learning to be satisfied with imperfect progress rather than demanding perfect transformation. You're learning to listen to your actual experience in the present moment rather than chasing some imagined future where you'll finally be good enough. These lessons are infinitely more valuable than having a perfect physique. And they can't be rushed. This same principle applies to every area of your life. You don't need to completely overhaul your career. You don't need to end all your relationships. You don't need to move to a different city. You don't need to become a different person overnight. You just need to identify one small thing that's within your control that would move slightly in the direction of feeling better, not better in the future. Not better once you achieve some goal. Better right now, today, in this moment. Maybe it's sending one text to an old friend you've lost touch with. Maybe it's spending 15 minutes on a hobby you used to enjoy. Maybe it's saying no to one obligation you don't actually want to fulfill. Maybe it's going for a short walk without your phone. It's eating one meal without distractions. Maybe it's spending 5 minutes sitting quietly with your own thoughts. These things sound trivial. They sound insufficient. They sound like they won't solve anything. And you're right, they won't solve everything, but they'll solve something. They'll move you one tiny step in the right direction. And here's the crucial part. When you take that small action and it makes you feel even slightly better, you need to notice that. You need to acknowledge it. You need to let yourself feel satisfied with it, because your identity is going to try to dismiss it. It's going to say that feeling slightly better isn't good enough, that you need to feel completely transformed. Anything less than total success is still failure. And you need to tell that voice to shut up. You need to celebrate the small win. You need to recognize that feeling slightly better is actually an achievement, especially when you've been feeling terrible for so long. This is what breaking the cycle actually looks like. It's not dramatic. It's not impressive. It's not something you'd make a motivational video about. It's just consistently choosing to do small things that make you feel slightly better, and consistently resisting the voice that says those small things aren't enough. Over time, those small things accumulate. Over time, you build momentum. Over time, you create actual sustainable change. It starts with being willing to do something that feels pathetically small and being satisfied with the pathetically small improvement it creates. There's another aspect of this that's crucial to understand. As you start making these small changes, as you start listening to yourself more, as you start honoring your actual feelings and needs, you're going to encounter resistance from the people around you, because they've gotten used to you being the person who doesn't listen to yourself. They've gotten used to you being the person who sacrifices for others. They've gotten used to you being the person they can rely on to always say yes, to always be available, to always put their needs first. Think about family dynamics for a moment. In many families, there's one person who carries everyone else. One sibling who takes care of aging parents while the others make excuses. One child who handles all the emergencies while the others remain unavailable. One person who coordinates everything, manages everything, and everyone else in the family has learned that they can be irresponsible because this one person will handle it, outsourced their responsibilities to this one individual. If you're that person, and you start setting boundaries, and you start saying no, and you start prioritizing your own well-being, the rest of the family is going to be upset. They're going to be angry. They're going to accuse you of being selfish. They're going to tell you that you're abandoning them. They're going to make you feel guilty. They're going to pressure you to go back to being the person who sacrifices themselves for everyone else's benefit. And this pressure is incredibly powerful, especially if you've built your identity around being that reliable person, that strong person, that person everyone can count on. But here's what you need to understand. Their upset is not evidence that you're doing something wrong. Anger is not proof that you're being selfish. Their guilt tripping is not a sign that you should go back to your old patterns. Their pressure is actually evidence that you're finally doing something right. You're finally setting appropriate boundaries. You're finally asking others to be responsible for themselves. You're finally refusing to enable their dysfunction by compensating for it. The fact that they're upset about this tells you something important. It tells you that the old arrangement wasn't sustainable or fair. It tells you that you were carrying more than your share of the burden. It tells you that they'd gotten comfortable with you sacrificing yourself for their benefit. And now that you're no longer willing to do that, they have to face the consequences of their own choices, and they don't like it. That's not your problem to solve by going back to destroying yourself for them. This is one of the hardest parts of changing these patterns because it forces you to confront the fact that some of your relationships might be fundamentally unhealthy. Of the people in your life might only value you for what you do for them, not for who you are. Your connections might be based entirely on you being willing to sacrifice yourself while they remain selfish. And when you stop sacrificing yourself, those relationships will either transform into something healthier or they'll end. Either outcome is better than continuing to destroy yourself to maintain relationships that are fundamentally exploitative. The same principle applies to work environments. If you're the person who always works late, who always takes on extra projects, who always says yes to additional responsibilities, your employer has gotten used to this. They've learned that they can ask more of you than they ask of others. They've learned that you'll accept more work without demanding more compensation. They've learned that you won't push back or set limits. And they've structured your role around the assumption that you'll continue being this person. If you start setting boundaries at work, if you start leaving on time, if you start saying no to additional responsibilities without additional compensation, if you start prioritizing your life outside of work, your employer might be unhappy about this. They might express concern about your commitment. They might question whether you're still a good fit for the role. They might pressure you to go back to overworking yourself. But again, their unhappiness is not evidence that you're doing something wrong. It's evidence that you were being exploited and you're no longer willing to accept that exploitation. This doesn't mean you become a bad employee. It doesn't mean you stop doing quality work. It doesn't mean you become unreliable or irresponsible. It just means you do the job you're actually being paid to do. Nothing more. You work the hours you're being compensated for. You fulfill the responsibilities in your job description. You're reliable within appropriate boundaries. If your employer is unhappy with this, if they need someone who will work 60 hours while being paid for 40, they need someone who will accept unlimited responsibilities without additional compensation. Then they need to hire someone else. You're no longer available to be exploited. The deeper point here is that changing these patterns means changing your relationship with everyone in your life. It means going from being the person who exists to serve others to being a person with your own needs who expects reciprocity in relationships. It means going from being the person who never says no to being a person who carefully chooses what they agree to. It means going from being the person who always sacrifices to being a person who sometimes prioritizes themselves. And this transformation will be threatening to anyone who benefited from the old version of you. You need to be prepared for this. You need to expect resistance. You need to know that some people will try to make you feel guilty for changing. And you need to be strong enough to maintain your boundaries anyway. This is where the real test happens, because it's one thing to decide you're going to change when you're alone thinking about it. It's another thing to maintain that change when your mother is crying, because you won't drop everything to help her with something she could handle herself. It's another thing to maintain that change when your boss implies your job might be at risk if you're not willing to be more flexible. It's another thing to maintain that change when your friends stop inviting you to things because you're no longer the person who always goes along with whatever they want. This is lonely. This is hard. This is why many people give up and go back to their old patterns. Because maintaining boundaries requires you to be okay with other people being unhappy with you. It requires you to prioritize your own well-being even when doing so disappoints others. It requires you to tolerate guilt without caving to it. It requires you to be comfortable with conflict instead of constantly accommodating to avoid it. And if you've built your entire identity around being the person everyone likes, the person who never causes problems, the person who makes everyone else comfortable, this is going to feel almost impossible. But here's what you need to remember. The people who truly care about you, who actually value you as a person rather than just valuing what you do for them, adjust to your boundaries. They might be initially surprised or confused or even upset. But if they genuinely care about you, once they understand that you're setting boundaries to protect your well-being, they'll respect that. They'll adjust their expectations. They'll learn to interact with you in this new way. The relationship might change, but it will become healthier, more balanced, more sustainable. The people who don't adjust, who continue to pressure you to go back to the old dynamic, who make you feel guilty for having boundaries, act like you're being unreasonable for prioritizing your own well-being, those people are revealing something important about how they see you. They see you as a resource to be used rather than a person to be valued. And as painful as it is to discover this, it's actually valuable information. It tells you which relationships are worth maintaining and which ones are actively harmful to you. This brings us to another crucial point about breaking these patterns. You can't do it alone. Not really. I mean, technically you can make changes without external support, but it's exponentially harder because you're fighting against years or decades of conditioning. You're fighting against internalized messages about who you should be. You're fighting against external pressure from people who want you to stay the same. You're fighting against your own identity that's telling you that change is weakness. Having support, having people who understand what you're trying to do and encourage you to keep going makes this process immensely more manageable. Here's the challenge. The same traits that got you into this mess often make it hard to seek support. Asking for help feels like admitting weakness. Opening up to others about your struggles feels like being emotional or needy. Admitting that you can't handle everything on your own feels like failing at being strong. So you try to do this transformation alone, trying to perform surgery on yourself. Technically possible, but unnecessarily difficult and prone to complications. You need to find people who can support this change. Maybe that's a therapist or counselor who can help you process everything you've been suppressing. Maybe that's a support group of people dealing with similar issues. Maybe that's a few close friends who you can be honest with. Maybe that's on online communities where you can connect with others on similar paths. The specific form doesn't matter as much as the function. You need people who will remind you that your feelings are valid, who will encourage you to maintain your boundaries, who will celebrate your small wins, who will hold space for you to be imperfect while still supporting your growth. And you need to be intentional about finding these people. They're not going to magically appear. You have to seek them out. You have to be willing to be vulnerable with them. You have to risk rejection by showing them who you actually are rather than the facade you've been maintaining. This is terrifying, especially if you've spent years cultivating an image of having everything together. But it's necessary because you can't maintain a facade while simultaneously dismantling that facade. You have to let at least some people see the real you. Now let's talk about something that comes up constantly when people start trying to make these changes. They look at their life and they feel this crushing sense of wasted time. They think about all the years they spent grinding in the wrong direction. They think about all the opportunities they missed while they were too busy working. They think about all the relationships that deteriorated while they were focused on their career. They think about all the experiences they didn't have because they were always sacrificing for some future payoff. And they feel this overwhelming regret and grief. This is completely normal and completely understandable. When you wake up to the fact that you've been living according to a script that wasn't serving you, when you realize how much time you've spent being miserable when you could have been finding a better way, it hurts. It's a real loss. And you need to allow yourself to grieve that loss. You need to acknowledge the pain of it. You need to give yourself permission to feel sad about the time you can't get back, the person you could have been, you could have lived. But here's what you can't do. You can't get stuck in that grief. You can't let it become another trap because there's this very seductive story you can tell yourself. You can say, I've wasted so much time already, so far behind where I should be. Everyone else figured this out earlier. I'm starting from zero in my 30s or 40s or 50s. It's too late for me. I've already missed my chance. My life is essentially over. I might as well just accept that I'm never going to be happy. This story is a trap. It's the same pattern expressing itself in a different form. It's your identity trying to maintain control by convincing you that change is impossible. Because if it's too late, if you've missed your chance, then you don't have to do the hard work of actually changing. You can just stay stuck and feel sorry for yourself. You can avoid the risk and uncertainty of trying something different by telling yourself there's no point in trying. But the premise is false. The entire concept of being too late is based on comparing yourself to some imagined ideal timeline. There's a right age to have your life figured out, and if you haven't reached certain milestones by certain ages, you failed. Who decided on that timeline? That timeline, where did those milestones come from? They're completely arbitrary social constructs. They're not laws of nature. They're not cosmic truths. They're just stories we tell ourselves about how life is supposed to go. The reality is that you are where you are. That's neither early nor late. It just is. You have the life you have. That's neither success nor failure. It just is. You feel how you feel. That's neither right nor wrong. It just is. And from this moment forward, you can make choices that move you toward feeling better or choices that keep you stuck feeling terrible. The past is gone. You can't change it. You can only change what you do next. This present moment orientation is essential for breaking free from these patterns. The pattern's always pulling you out of the present moment. They're pulling you into either the past with regret and rumination, future with anxiety and striving. The identity you're trying to embody doesn't exist in the present. It exists in an imagined future where you finally achieved enough to be worthy. The self you're running away from doesn't exist in the present either. It exists in a remembered past or an imagined future where you've failed. The actual you, the real you, only exists right now in this present moment. And the paradox is that the more you can exist in this present moment, power both the identity and the negative self-image have over you. Because in the present moment, you're not trying to be anyone. You're not running from anyone. You're just being. You're just experiencing. You're just alive. And from that place of just being alive right now, you can make choices about what to do next that are based on your actual experience rather than based on abstract concepts of who you should be. This is what involvement means. It means being fully present with whatever you're experiencing right now, not trying to change it, not trying to escape it, not trying to think your way through it, just experiencing it fully. If you're feeling sad, be sad. Don't try to fix the sadness. Don't judge yourself for being sad. Don't create a story about why you're sad or what it means that you're sad. Just feel the sadness fully. Let it move through you. Let it express itself. Let it exist. This sounds simple, but it's incredibly difficult to actually do because we've been taught to immediately do something about any negative emotion. We feel sad and immediately we're trying to figure out why so we can fix it. We feel anxious and immediately we're trying to distract ourselves so we don't have to feel it. We feel angry and immediately we're either suppressing it or acting on it without actually feeling it. We rarely just let ourselves feel what we feel without immediately trying to change it or escape it or explain it or justify it. Feelings are information. They're signals. And you can't receive the signal if you're constantly trying to change or escape or suppress the signal. You have to let yourself feel it and completely without doing anything about it in order to understand what it's trying to tell you. And once you understand what it's telling you, you can respond appropriately. But you can't skip the feeling part. You can't go straight to responding without first fully feeling. Because if you do, your response will be based on your idea of what you should be feeling rather than what you're actually feeling. This is why involvement is so powerful when you're fully involved with your actual present moment experience. You're getting accurate information about your life. And with accurate information, you can make good decisions. When you're disconnected from your present moment experience, when you're living in abstract concepts and future projections and identity goals, you're making decisions based on inaccurate information. You're trying to navigate using a map that doesn't match the territory. And you end up lost and confused, wondering why your strategies aren't working. Let's make this concrete with an example. Imagine you're at work and you feel exhausted and resentful. If you're disconnected from your present moment experience, interpret this as weakness that needs to be overcome. So you push harder, drink more coffee. Tell yourself to be tougher. If you're fully involved with your present moment experience, you actually feel the exhaustion and resentment. You notice the quality of it. You notice where it lives in your body. You notice what thoughts accompany it. You might discover that the exhaustion is your body telling you you're overworked. The resentment is your psyche telling you you're being treated unfairly. These are valuable signals. They're telling you that something needs to change. From that place of actually feeling what you feel, you can make a different choice. Maybe you decide to have a conversation with your boss about workload. Maybe you decide to start looking for a different job. You decide to set boundaries around working hours. Maybe you decide that this isn't the right career path for you. Whatever you decide, it's based on actual information rather than abstract concepts. It's based on your real experience rather than who you think you should be. This doesn't mean every feeling should be immediately acted on. Sometimes you feel something, and the appropriate response is to feel it fully and then let it pass without taking any external action. Sometimes you feel something, and the appropriate response is to investigate where it's coming from before deciding what to do about it. Sometimes you feel something, and the appropriate response is to make a major life change. The point is that you can't know what the appropriate response is until you've fully felt what you're feeling. The feeling has to come first. This is where the idea of acceptance becomes important. And acceptance is often misunderstood. People think acceptance means resignation. You're just giving up and accepting that things are terrible and will always be terrible. That's not what acceptance means in this context. Acceptance means acknowledging what is without immediately trying to change it. It means being willing to feel what you feel, experience what you're experiencing, be where you are, immediately jumping to fixing or escaping or changing. From a place of acceptance, you can then make choices about what to do. But the acceptance has to come first. You have to accept that you're exhausted before you can decide to rest. You have to accept that you're unhappy before you can decide to make changes. You have to accept that your current path isn't working before you can choose a different path. If you skip the acceptance and go straight to trying to change things, you're just running from what is rather than responding to what is. Running from what is means you're still disconnected from your actual experience, making decisions based on abstract concepts rather than reality. This is why people can make dramatic life changes and still end up unhappy. They quit their job, move to a new city, end their relationship, completely transform their lifestyle, and they're still miserable because they made all these changes while running from their unhappiness rather than from a place of accepted unhappiness. They never actually felt what they were feeling. They never actually understood what their feelings were telling them. They just knew they felt bad and wanted to feel different. So they changed everything external, hoping the internal would follow. External changes without internal acceptance just transplant your misery to a new location. You're the same person with the same patterns in a different environment. You still don't know how to feel what you feel. You still don't know how to be present with your experience. you still don't know how to make decisions based on your actual needs rather than abstract identities. You recreate the same dynamics in the new situation. Different job, same misery. Different city, same isolation. Different relationship, same conflicts. New lifestyle, same emptiness. This is why the work has to be internal first. You have to learn how to be with yourself, how to feel your feelings, how to stay present with your experience before external changes will actually make a lasting difference. The beautiful thing is that once you develop these internal capacities, you often find that the external changes you thought you needed aren't as dramatic as you imagined. Just learning to be present with your life as it is transforms the experience of that life. Sometimes the job that felt intolerable becomes manageable once you set appropriate boundaries. Sometimes the relationship that felt oppressive becomes fulfilling once you learn to communicate your needs. The city that felt suffocating feels fine once you learn to create connection. Not always. The external changes really are necessary. You really do need to leave the job or end the relationship or move to a new place. You make those decisions from a different place. You make them from a place of clarity rather than desperation. You make them because you've carefully assessed your actual experience and determined that change is necessary because you're frantically running from discomfort. And changes made from clarity tend to work out much better than changes made from desperation. How do you actually develop this capacity for presence and acceptance? How do you learn to feel your feelings when you've spent years or decades not feeling them? How do you learn to stay with discomfort when your entire life has been organized around avoiding discomfort? Honest answer is that it's a practice. It's not something you figure out once and then you're done. It's something you do repeatedly, gradually building the capacity over time. It starts with small moments of intentional presence. Maybe you sit for 5 minutes in the morning and just notice what you're feeling without trying to change it. Maybe you take a walk without your phone and just observe your thoughts and sensations. Maybe you pause before reacting to something and just feel your impulse to react without immediately acting on it. These tiny moments of stopping, noticing, and feeling build the muscle of presence. They teach your nervous system that it's okay to feel what you feel, that feelings aren't emergencies that need immediate action. You can survive discomfort without immediately escaping it. This is uncomfortable at first, really uncomfortable. Because when you stop distracting yourself, when you stop pushing through, when you stop running, you start to feel everything you've been avoiding. And everything you've been avoiding is still there waiting for you. Years of accumulated sadness, years of suppressed anger, years of unacknowledged fear, years of denied loneliness. It's all there. You start to let yourself feel it. It can be overwhelming. This is why it's important to go slowly. You don't need to feel everything all at once. You can't feel everything all at once. You start with 5 minutes, just 5 minutes of being present with whatever comes up. And maybe those 5 minutes are hard. Maybe you feel anxious or sad or angry or restless. That's okay. You don't have to fix those feelings. You don't have to understand them. You just have to feel them for 5 minutes. That's the practice. And then tomorrow you do it again. And the day after that. And gradually your capacity to be with difficult feelings increases. Over time, something interesting starts to happen. The feelings that seemed so overwhelming when you first allowed yourself to feel them start become more manageable because they've gone away, but because you've developed the capacity to hold them. You've learned that you can feel sad without it destroying you. You can feel anxious without it spiraling into panic. You can feel angry without it exploding into rage. You can feel lonely without it crushing you. The feelings are still intense. You're more spacious inside. There's room for the feelings to exist without taking over completely. And as you develop this capacity, you start to notice something else. The feelings change. They move. They shift. They evolve. When you actually allow yourself to fully feel something instead of suppressing it or running from it, it doesn't stay static. It expresses itself, releases itself, transforms itself. The sadness you thought would last forever actually moves through you in 20 minutes if you let yourself fully feel it. The anxiety that seemed permanent actually peaks and subsides if you stay with it instead of fighting it. The anger that felt explosive actually settles into something more like firm boundaries if you feel it without immediately acting on it. This is one of the biggest revelations for people who start doing this work. They discover that feelings aren't permanent states that need to be fixed. They're temporary experiences that need to be felt. When you actually feel them, they naturally resolve themselves. Not immediately. Not on your preferred timeline. But they do resolve. They do move change. But only if you let them. If you keep suppressing them, they stay stuck. If you keep running from them, they chase you. If you keep trying to think your way out of them, they persist. You have to feel them to release them. This is what people mean when they talk about emotional processing. It's not about analyzing your emotions or understanding where they came from or developing insights about them. Those things can be helpful, but they're not the core work. The core work is just feeling, actually feeling. Letting the emotion be present in your body and consciousness without trying to change it or escape it or explain it. Just feeling it and completely until it naturally shifts on its own. And as you get better at this, as you develop the capacity to be with your emotions, to trust yourself more, you start to trust that you can handle whatever comes up. You stop being so afraid of your own feelings. You stop organizing your entire life around avoiding discomfort. You become more willing to take risks, to try new things, to make changes, because you know that even if it doesn't work out, even if you feel bad, you can handle feeling bad. It won't destroy you. You'll feel it, process it, learn from it, and continue. This trust in your own capacity to handle difficult emotions is transformative. So much of the grinding, so much of the pushing, so much of the unhealthy perseverance comes from a terror of failure. If you try something different and it doesn't work, you'll feel terrible. You'll feel like a failure. You'll feel weak and inadequate and ashamed. And you've spent your entire life trying to avoid feeling those things. You stay stuck in situations you hate because at least they're predictable. At least you know what to expect. At least you're not risking the crushing disappointment of trying and failing. But once you develop the capacity to handle difficult emotions, failure becomes less terrifying. Not because you won't feel bad if you fail. You will. But you'll feel bad, process it, learn from it, and continue. Failure becomes information rather than identity. It becomes a temporary experience rather than a permanent state. It becomes something you go through rather than something you are. And from that place, you become much more willing to take the risks necessary to actually change your life. This brings us back to the question of what to do when you look in the mirror and don't like what you see. The answer isn't to become someone else. The answer isn't to achieve some ideal identity. The answer isn't to fix everything wrong with you. The answer is to ask yourself what small thing you could do today that would make you feel slightly better about yourself when you look in the mirror tomorrow. Proud in an ego sense, not accomplished in an external validation sense. Just better in a genuine internal sense. Maybe it's apologizing to someone you hurt. Maybe it's doing something kind for someone with no expectation of recognition. Maybe it's keeping a small promise you made to yourself. Maybe it's being honest in a situation where you'd normally lie or deceive. Maybe it's standing up for yourself when you'd normally let yourself be walked over. Maybe it's allowing yourself to rest when you'd normally push through exhaustion. The specific action matters less than the principle. You're looking for things that align your external behavior with your internal values. You're looking for things that create congruence between who you actually are and how you're actually living. Because here's the secret. The reason you don't like what you see in the mirror isn't because you're not successful enough or attractive enough or accomplished enough. It's because there's a gap between who you actually are and how you're actually living. You have values, but you're not honoring them. You have needs, your boundaries, but you're not meeting them. You have boundaries, but you're not enforcing them. You have feelings, but you're not feeling them. This incongruence, this gap between your true self and your lived experience creates the shame and self-loathing and sense of inadequacy. So the work isn't about becoming some idealized version of yourself. It is about closing the gap between who you are and how you live. It's about bringing your life into alignment with your actual values, needs, feelings, and boundaries. And every small action you take that closes that gap makes you feel genuinely better about yourself. Not because you've achieved something impressive, not because you've proven your worth, not because you've earned anyone's respect, because you're living with more integrity, more congruence, more alignment between your internal experience and external expression. This is what creates sustainable well-being, not achievement, not success, not validation, not even happiness in the conventional sense. Integrity, congruence, alignment, living in a way that honors who you actually are rather than in service of some image of who you think you should be. And the beautiful thing is that when you live with integrity, when you close the gap between who you are and how you live, you naturally start to feel better. Not because your circumstances are perfect, not because you've solved all your problems, because you're finally being yourself. And being yourself, it turns out, feels really good. Not in an excited or euphoric way. Just in a solid, grounded, peaceful way. You're not fighting yourself anymore. You're not at war with your own experience. You're not constantly trying to be someone you're not. You're just you, living your life, feeling your feelings, making decisions based on your actual experience. And that simple thing, just being yourself without pretense or performance, is profoundly relieving after years or decades of pretending to be someone else. This doesn't mean life becomes easy. It doesn't mean problems disappear. It doesn't mean you never feel bad. You still experience challenges, difficulties, pain, loss, disappointment, all of it. But you experience these things differently. You experience them as a person who's grounded in themselves, rather than as a person who's desperately trying to prove something. And that makes all the difference. The pain is just pain rather than evidence of your inadequacy. The difficulty is just difficulty rather than proof you're not strong enough. The challenge is just a challenge rather than a test of your worth. Your worth, it turns out, doesn't need to be tested or proven or earned. You're worthy just by virtue of existing. You're valuable just because you're a human being. You deserve kindness and respect and care and love just because you're alive, because of what you've achieved or accomplished or proven. Just because you exist. This is the hardest thing for people who've been caught in these patterns to accept. They've spent so long believing they have to earn their worth, they have to prove their value, they have to achieve their way into deserving love and respect. The idea that they're worthy just as they are, without having accomplished anything, feels foreign and wrong and almost offensive. But it's true. Your worth isn't conditional. It's intrinsic. The sooner you can accept this, the sooner you can stop trying to earn what you already have. You already have worth. You already have value. You already deserve kindness and respect and care and love. You don't need to achieve anything else. You don't need to become anyone else. You don't need to prove anything. You just need to accept what's already true and start living accordingly. This acceptance is the foundation of everything else. Because until you accept your intrinsic worth, you'll keep trying to earn it through achievement. You'll keep pushing yourself to be perfect. You'll keep sacrificing yourself to be useful. You'll keep suppressing yourself to be acceptable. You'll keep performing to be validated. And none of it will ever be enough because you're trying to earn something you already have. You're trying to prove something that doesn't need to be proven. You're trying to become worthy when you're already worthy. So the real work, the deepest work, is learning to accept your own worth without conditions. Learning to treat yourself with kindness regardless of your achievements. Learning to respect yourself even when you fail. Learning to care for yourself even when you're struggling. Learning to love yourself even when you're imperfect. This isn't narcissism. This isn't arrogance. This isn't thinking you're better than anyone else. It's just basic human decency extended toward yourself. You wouldn't treat someone else the way you treat yourself. You wouldn't demand that another person work themselves into the ground to prove their worth. You wouldn't expect someone else to be perfect before deserving kindness. You wouldn't require someone else to suppress all their needs and feelings to be acceptable. You wouldn't insist that someone else earn your respect through endless achievement. You'd extend basic compassion and understanding and support. You'd recognize their inherent humanity and treat them accordingly. You need to do the same for yourself. You need to extend the same compassion toward yourself that you'd extend toward others. You need to recognize your own inherent humanity and treat yourself accordingly. Not perfectly, not all the time, but more often, consistently, with more genuine care. This is what self-compassion actually means, not self-indulgence. Not letting yourself off the hook for everything. Just treating yourself like a human being who deserves basic kindness, rather than like a W continue machine that needs to perform or be discarded. And when you start doing this, when you start treating yourself with genuine compassion, something interesting happens. You become less desperate for external validation. You become less driven by the need to prove yourself. You become less afraid of other people's judgments because you're giving yourself the kindness and acceptance you were trying to earn from others. You're providing internally what you were seeking externally. And from that place of internal sufficiency, you're free to make different choices about how you live. You don't need to stay in the job that's destroying you because you need it to prove your worth. You already have worth. You don't need to maintain relationships that are toxic because you need them to validate your acceptability. You're already acceptable. You don't need to achieve the next milestone to deserve rest or pleasure or joy. You already deserve those things. When you're not desperately trying to earn your worth through external means, you're free to make choices based on what actually serves your well-being rather than what proves your value. This is liberation. This is freedom. This is what it means to break free from the grinding cycle that's been destroying you. Not through more achievement, not through better performance, not through finally reaching the pinnacle where you've earned the right to be happy, through accepting that you're already worthy, you're already valuable, you're already deserving, and starting to live from that place. Through recognizing that happiness isn't something you earn at the end of a long struggle. It's something you cultivate in each present moment by living with integrity, by honoring your actual experience, treating yourself with compassion, by being fully involved with your life as it actually is rather than as you think it should be. This is the path forward, not easy, not quick, not dramatic or impressive, just consistently choosing to be present with what is, feel what you feel, to honor what you need, to live with integrity, to treat yourself with compassion. Small choices made repeatedly over time. Building a different relationship with yourself. Creating a different way of being in the world. Becoming someone who's genuinely okay, not because they've achieved everything, because they've learned to be present with themselves exactly as they are. And from that place of genuine okayness, building a life that actually feels good to live rather than one that just looks good from the outside.